why we experiment. So first, we all want to build products that matters. And what generally matters is what our customers want. So through experimentation, this is what we can get. Most of the times we have great ideas that are generally based on guessworks and assumptions built on by our own experiences. But then through experimentation and testing, we can then understand what really resonates with our customers and then build and invest in what really matters. You'll be surprised. In the industry, approximately only 15% of all these great ideas succeed. So secondly, why do we experiment is essentially for innovation. So experimentation is a medium through which we can use to innovate and implement new ideas into practical solutions. One of the greatest examples in the history of mankind is the invention and evolution of light bulbs. Through many new ideas, great ideas, researches, experiments, and iterations, we moved from campfires to candles to fluorescent and LEDs. So can you imagine a world without light bulbs? And this wouldn't have been possible without experimentation. And lastly, experimentation is a way for us to establish causality, the cause and effect relationship between different variables. So through having different variations of treatments to different groups of people, we can then understand how an action A causes effects in B. However, here also it is very important to distinguish from correlations, where changes in A could cause changes in B, but does not necessarily mean that A causes B. To give you an example, so in summer, it's hot and sunny. It could cause increase in sales of ice cream, and it could also cause higher rates of sunburn. But eating more ice cream does not make you sunburned. So now that I've convinced you why we should experiment, I'm going to pass it on to GT to talk a little bit about the how.
Thank you. Cool. So now I will be speaking about mostly like how should we run experiment, like running more effective experiments. And generally, this is not at all suggestive, but definitely highly recommended. What is the flow that we should choose? So like Z was saying, of course, you can have your own assumptions and you can just go about building everything, whatever comes to your head. So super important, the first thing, the most important component of all is you first begin with the problem statement. Like you first identify what is the business or the product problem that you want to solve. Once you have identified the problem, then you go speak with and of course, like in the problem, it can be backed up with the data, like some quantitative data which is in-house, or maybe some market researchers as well, just to support like this is definitely a problem. And of course, once you do that, you're going to speak with, let's say, your PMs or maybe your designers, some UX researchers, etc., and possibly come up with a solution. And in most cases, in an online setup, you can have like a product feature. Once you have that, then like we have to understand, like imagine if there are 100 people, not everybody will like the same food. Like, for example, I love Indian food, super sucker for that. Z likes, I don't know, like Chinese or maybe, yeah, or seafood for that matter. So of course, it does not really fit everything. So we have to be also knowing like how your solution, like what is the target audience for your particular solution. Once you know like your problem, your potential feature, your users, and then you have to have certain hypothesis, like how that particular solution is going to benefit your users, like what is the outcome that you would want to see. And then like you have the hypothesis, then you have to know like how exactly you're going to measure, like how would you quantify your hypothesis, the potential solution that you're going to be building. And the very important thing that we would like to emphasize on is basically like you continuously iterate the whole model to generate as many learnings as possible, which will further lead to many more innovations that you would possibly want to see in your product. Now I'm going to talk about one small experiment that we ran at Glovo, which is basically about the search results redesign. So the problem we saw based on some market researchers is we see lesser engagement and lesser conversion on search. That was the problem precisely which we wanted to address. Then what we thought would be really amazing that if we can come up with a more improved version of the search results UI. And we said, of course, everyone who is opening Glovo will not really be benefited from the solution. So whoever will visit the search page will get benefited. So that is precisely our target audience. And once you know like what exactly you are going to be building, it will definitely help the users to make like more quicker decisions, which is gonna be the benefit part of it. And last but not least, like how exactly do we prove if this improved UI has actually impacted anything and like being translated in a more measured way? So the matrix that we chose is like search click through, search conversion rate, and the overall conversion rate. So this is how it's going to look like. So you had like your control group, which is basically like how the search page looks like today. And we had like 3 different designs, what we could potentially test. And like we learned from users how they're going to be interacting with these 3 versions. And whatever is going to win will basically like be integrated for the longer in the product. After this, I'm just going to share like the results which we gotten after running this experiment. So what we saw, like the problem was lower engagement and lower conversion rate. What we found is there was a significant increase in your search CTR, which is search click-through rate, representing the engagement. But very contradictory to that, we saw a dip in the search CVR, which is like a lot of people were engaging, or we saw more people engaging, but not everything was translating into more conversion or like more people placing the order, and which is kind of like reflected in the overall CVR, which did not see any kind of a change. And after seeing this high level results, what we went ahead, we did a deep dive, we tried to understand why is that. And like few interesting findings that we got in this whole process is so like if you remember, like we had this page wherein you have the sponsored tag, and what we found, and this is one of our hypotheses, is when users see the sponsored tag, they are like more apprehensive about clicking the store results that they see on the page. And that has been like one of the bigger learnings from this whole experiment for us. So the next thing what we try to do, like as an iteration, 2 key takeaways. We redesigned this whole experiment with like removing the sponsor tags from the whole UI, because we saw that kind of lowered the engagement and also lowered the conversion rate. And at the same time, it also gave us a huge learning that we should go ahead and do some market researches to understand the user perception about like if we put the sponsor tag versus like what is the other thing that we could potentially put instead. So one thing which I want to emphasize through all this is we started with one experiment. We've had few learnings. We suggested the user research team, we suggested the product managers, etc. And then we went ahead and reiterated the same experiment so that just to continuously evolve our understanding about and also at the same time improving the best user experience as we can. Cool. Uh, After this, I'm just going to very briefly talk about some terminologies that you always hear while running online experiments. So the first and the foremost is like randomization. When you hear randomization, like imagine like you have some million users, and if you want to segregate them, let's say in two equal groups, the randomization as a technique ensures that the possibility of one user like being in either of the group is equal. And why do we want randomization? Just to make sure that the results that you'll measure later should not really be biased by any kind of an external stimuli. Um, the another thing which is very important to keep in mind and very, very precise is like you have to have a great hypothesis which clearly defines two things. One, that what is the problem, and second, what is the outcome that you would want to see by running this particular experiment. The third thing is when you have the hypothesis, you know the problem, you know what is the solution and the impact that you would want to see like, as a change in user behavior. How exactly would you quantify that in a quantifiable way, and which is kind of represented in the form of a success matrix. So super important to have a good success matrix, which is highly and like completely translate that what is it that you want. After that, like one thing which always product managers or probably like in most companies PMs tend to do, like say for example you design the experiment but you're always in a hurry to reach your go to market, and you probably overlook the fact that you have to compute like a decent sample size to measure the impact that you want to see. And for that it is important to always like define the sample size, like do the power analysis, define the sample size, keep your experiment running for a certain time, and then measure the effect. The next thing is statistical significance. Of course, like it's all probability. You can never be 100% confident. Whatever results that you are seeing is there or not there. So you have to always go with certain amount of confidence, and that's kind of represented by having statistical significance. Last but not least is about novelty effect. This is something we kind of overlook, like, and especially whenever you are doing some front end based experiments. So a lot of times what happens, like users can start interacting with a lot of like with UI component that you have offered them, but at the same time, it could be just a short term kind of an interaction with your new feature, but in the long term that might not lead to any kind of an impact in your success metric. So it's very important to give some cool off period to account for the novelty effect. So I think more or less like we should be aware and like well educated and always keep in mind all these things whenever we are setting up experiments. Okay, so I think we are good, and now this is time for some Q&A.
Okay, so the question is, how do we identify user problems at Glovo?
So yeah. I think that's really a great question because like problem could be 100 problems, no? So the way I look at it, or the way ideally it should happen in a setup like Glovo, which is like huge business, you go ahead and you first try to identify, let's say, the business priorities. So for example, for us, like let's say AOV is one of the important levers that we would want to influence. And what are the things when you break down, let's say AOV, and do some data researches, which is in-house, like looking at the quantitative data and find out those levers which kind of represent, hey, here's the funnel, this is where the problem. Maybe more people are just dropping off at the promo page, or more people are dropping off at the checkout page. This is where we could do something to solve that problem. That is one way, which is quantitative analysis. And then there is another way, which is doing more qualitative analysis, do some market researches, talk to users, speak with people, or do some competitive analysis to actually understand that, hey, this is where my product like has a gap with other things in the market, like to prioritize the problem. No, so that is how we should go about like identifying the problem. And of course, like the second phase would be prioritizing the problem as well. No, so yeah, that is how you go about it. Okay. Yes. Yeah. 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 I think. Yeah. Yeah, so that's exactly why, as a next level of iteration, we recommend to do a market research. So imagine if you put sponsored, that kind of gives a signal to end users that, hey, maybe this is ad and it's very intuitive. But imagine replacing the same sponsored tag with a icon, which does not tell the users or which does not create the perception amongst users that this is advertised, and that will make them click it anyways. Like that's the trick. No, that's it's all about like user perception and what they perceive and how you would want to solve it. Like, does that answer? Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I think that's a very okay. Cool. I think the question is, what is the ratio of experiments that results in improvement? Is that the question? Okay. Cool. What is the ratio? I'm like currently I mean, first of all, I have to confess, like this is still like an ongoing process. And in like one of the parts in Glovo, which is customer, where we run most of the experiments, I would say like around 30 to 40% of experiments results in success. But that ratio could differ like in different clusters or different business units, more or less.
If there's no questions, thank you so much for the attention, and please feel free to reach out if you have more questions.